There's nothing there. Stravik's voice dropped lower than protocol allowed, each syllable carved from disbelief. He stood frozen, his gaze fixed on the central laser plasma display that flickered in the amphitheater of the Galactic Senate. Not static, not disrupted, just gone. Where Earth had orbited its star, the screen displayed an expanse of quiet starfield, unmarred by energy residue or gravitational disturbance. An entire solar system had vanished like vapor. No radiative echoes, no debris trail, no measurable aftershock. "Run the scan again," barked Representative Threxel, his forked jaw tense, arms stiff across his chest. He never blinked during tension. That was his species' tell. "Already confirmed twice," replied the technician, his translucent fingers dancing across the sensor interface embedded into his station. "No anomalous subspace fractures, no radiation bleed, and no temporal shear." Threxel's gaze narrowed. "Then we're missing something. Systems don't just evaporate." A low ambient pulse from the chamber's lighting adjusted itself, responding to the rising distress among the council, walls darkening from luminous teal to bruised violet. A silence took root, not born of reverence, but of disbelief creeping into every corner of the room like frost under a sealed door. Stravik exhaled slowly through his secondary slits, the scent of dry minerals lingering in the chamber, stress pheromones from dozens of species starting to mingle, creating a cocktail of unease. "Observer Tyrex," Stravik ordered, regaining command of the moment. "Report to the floor. Now." From the upper watch tier, Tyrex descended. His elongated frame glided silently, eye nodes rotating in complex spirals as he passed layers of bioluminescent Senate envoys. He was a phase specialist, adept in gravitational lensing theory and quantum echo trace mapping. "Field displacement does not lie," Tyrex said without ceremony. "Gravitational void is measurable, even when mass is hidden, but in this case," he paused and tapped his node into the display's quantum interpreter. Streams of data arced in midair, cascading down into rows of shifting blue glyphs. There is no distortion. A ripple spread through the Senate, not a noise, not a movement, but the collective tightening of breath. Stravik leaned forward, his facial plates angled sharply now, unreadable. "You're telling us this isn't cloaking or a dimensional phase?" Tyrex rotated one iris backward, his species' form of emphasis. "There was movement, but not displacement in known physical terms. The solar mass didn't transition. It evacuated existence." Threxel let out a sound that was halfway between a growl and a laugh. "You're implying they broke causality?" "No," Tyrex corrected. "I'm implying we were too distracted by their clumsy space stations and combustion debris to notice their timeline diverged from ours 2 centuries ago." The words landed like tectonic shift. Stravik felt the implications before he understood them. His thoughts swam to every negotiation, every trade report, every instance of human technological malfunction, failures that always seemed too theatrical, too convenient. They had played the part of slow learners so convincingly, the entire Senate had assumed Earth was harmless. Representative Corin from the Council of Structural Sciences, seated behind a translucent dais, spoke up with restrained confusion. "But their colony reports on Mars. Unrefined, inefficient. How could they phase an entire system while still struggling with atmospheric regulation?" Tyrex didn't blink. "Their reports may have been fiction. The infrastructure beneath may have been something else entirely." "Deception on that scale is unfeasible," Threxel shot back, flaring his neck plates in protest. "We had diplomatic inspectors embedded within their planetary networks." "Did we?" Stravik muttered. "Or were we seeing what they allowed us to see?" Heads turned, eyes shifted. The room no longer pulsed with confusion. It now simmered with the eerie possibility that the truth had never been visible at all. Suddenly the laser plasma wall flickered. An update from the deep observation grid. The data rendered an interactive gravimetric pulse map centered on the Sol system's last coordinates. Corin, the archivist, appeared behind the upper platform. We're detecting staggered ripple echoes across localized dark matter threads, aligned perfectly with theoretical models of... He hesitated. Stravik raised an eyebrow. Of what? Phase void anchoring, Corin said, barely audible, a process that requires extreme field precision and system-wide coordination. Breivik, the lead Senate physicist, emerged next to Tyrex. He stared at the data like one might study cave drawings that suddenly started moving. I designed some of those simulations as theory. Never ran them. The power draw is exponential. You would need planetary cores calibrated in sequence. Tyrex's voice turned hollow. Then that's what they did. They didn't phase just Earth. They phased the planets, the asteroid belts, the satellites, all synchronized to disappear in a single silent shift. Madness, Threxil whispered. No, Stravik replied. Mastery. The chamber felt colder, not from temperature, from exposure, from the raw realization that a civilization they had written off had enacted a feat so far beyond Senate consensus understanding they couldn't even label it correctly. A technician signaled from the corner. We've recovered an old observational ping, 41 cycles ago. Background noise then, insignificant at the time. Tyrex snapped his gaze toward the feed. Project it. The display lit up again, an ancient solar scan. In the lower hemisphere, faint and fragmented, was a subtle energy pulse resembling nothing the Senate had catalogued, but its waveform matched the gravimetric echo now hovering in the void. They were testing this. Generations ago, Tyrex muttered. Stravik straightened. Which means... They planned this, Threxil finished grimly. Centuries in advance. Outside the chamber, emergency beacon protocols had begun flashing across Senate observatories. Civilizations were querying the relay hubs for Earth status. Some called it a disaster. Others called it an act of aggression. None called it what it was, preparation. Stravik looked back at the now empty corner of the galaxy where Earth once spun around its yellow star. They hadn't run. They hadn't failed. They had made themselves invisible. And somewhere, out beyond the veil, humanity was waiting, watching, moving pieces on a board the Senate hadn't realized existed. He turned to Tyrex. Assemble the quantum specialists. Find the trail. Don't assume we can follow it. Assume they meant for us to try. The chamber lights dimmed once more, not by design but by instinct. The galaxy had just lost a system, but perhaps it had gained a warning. Archivist Corin's claws tapped a steady rhythm against the edge of the archival vault's access port, not from impatience, but unease. The sensor-laced vault doors responded with a hissless slide, revealing the dimly lit corridor of the inner archive. Walls lined with data spires so old, their encryption cores pulsed with static memory decay. He didn't look back as he entered. The door sealed with a pressure lock, leaving the quiet broken only by the faint tick of quantum drives calibrating in the background. Behind him, historian Varnak's heavier steps echoed as he entered, his broad form stooping to avoid the ceiling filaments. You realize, Varnak muttered, we're reviewing centuries of fringe reports because Earth vanished. Corin didn't turn. Number. We're reviewing them because everything we ever assumed might be wrong. The core records had been preserved here since before the Senate had expanded beyond its first 100 worlds. Data collated from observation logs, minor field missions, independent documentation, and the odd diplomatic oddity. Useless for policy, crucial for patterns. Corin waved his control band. Heads-up displays unfolded above the archivist's workstation, casting cool shades of pale green and shifting violet across his face. Tens of thousands of entries spiraled upward. Filter by pre-contact anomalies. Origin, Sol system. Time frame, 200 cycles pre-unification, he said. Lines of glyphs poured in, rearranged themselves, and halted with a sudden digital snap. 341 incidents. Varnak let out a single low exhale. How did we miss this many? Because none of them fit our understanding of structured development, Corin replied. So we labeled them as cultural myths or translation faults. He opened the first file. A static washed video clip from what looked like a subterranean human structure. Dimensions cluttered. Makeshift. A child, no older than 8 by visual estimate, stood beside a makeshift array of copper coils and insulated tubing. Sparks arced between nodes. The caption read, Rural Education Project, Clean Energy Challenge. Corin fast-forwarded. As the device stabilized, it emitted a containment field signature. Breivik's energy overlay confirmed it. Localized fusion ignition. A child, Varnak murmured. A child built a fusion engine from farm debris and scavenged appliance parts. And no one believed it, Corin said. It was archived as a viral hoax. No formal review. Senate dismissed it within 2 days. The screen shifted again. A university science fair, this time a teenager demonstrating spatial field collapse with what appeared to be parts of domestic machinery. The audience laughed. He smiled politely. The device reversed a small gravitational tug, suspending a steel sphere in rotational stasis. Another incident, this one from a coastal settlement. A man in a garage accidentally creating quantum field harmonics while trying to repair an irrigation circuit. Every observer dismissed it as magnetic fluctuation. These aren't isolated cases, Corin said, brows furrowed. They form a trend line. Varnak leaned in. You're suggesting this wasn't chance. They seeded these. More than that, Corin replied, switching views. They performed field experiments inside their own society, cloaked as educational stunts or homegrown anomalies, using their own civilians as part of a long-term observational pattern. Heads-up data displays adjusted as Corin layered historical education policies from Earth's mid-development years. The frequency of scientific anomalies increased every generation, not evenly, strategically. Intentional placement of disruptive tech in lower strata populations, Corin said, always just beyond the capability of formal review. Always dismissed. Varnak's fingers clenched. They weren't hiding their progress. They were hiding their timeline. The archive sensors pulsed again. A file updated itself. A long-term access request by Earth's diplomatic branch just 3 weeks before their disappearance. Varnak reviewed it silently. Requested records, recursive threat phenomena, cosmological collapse events, interdimensional harmonics. Corin looked up, his eyes now fixed. That section is black tier restricted. No civilization below Phase 10 gets access, Varnak confirmed. And yet, they asked. Which means they knew. Silence deepened. Then Corin pulled up Earth's submitted research abstracts from the prior decade. On the surface, they looked like early quantum stabilization papers. But buried in the signal metadata were gravitational simulations that mirrored the recursive entity collapse models theorized in restricted archives. Varnak's mind spiraled. They'd been studying it before we ever named it. Corin opened the magnetic logbooks of Senate Council 14A. Buried beneath administrative votes was an unreviewed inquiry submitted by Earth's ambassador 4 standard cycles ago. Topic: Existential cosmic anomalies and pre-galactic life extinction patterns. No follow-up, no reply. Varnak's voice grew sharp. They were screaming in equations and we shrugged at the noise. Corin stood. They didn't leave us a warning. They left us a history we refused to read. From above, a new alert chimed. Breivik's channel. Corin accepted the feed. The physicist appeared, eyes sunken, Voice clipped. "I've been reviewing gravitation echoes across the systems. We logged similar disturbances 5 times in the last 70 cycles. They were buried under routine observatory logs." Corin frowned. "Locations? Mars, Europa, Titan, and once, oddly, beneath the Pacific crust of Earth itself, all dismissed as seismic misreads or equipment faults. And now? They match the post-vanishing echo pattern from Seoul. Exactly." Varnak stepped back from the heads-up display. "Then the phase displacement wasn't a last-minute decision." "No," Brevik said quietly. "It was choreography." The display dimmed. The air felt heavier, not with temperature but comprehension. A civilization had danced beneath the Senate's gaze, cloaked in engineered incompetence, while planting threads of a greater warning in every minor act of genius they allowed to surface. "Do you see it now?" Corin said, his voice quieter than before. "They wanted us to ignore them, so we'd never see how far ahead they really were." Varnak stared at the last clip on screen. A young human child drawing fractal shapes in the dirt, symbols no one had deciphered at the time. Now those same symbols glowed in the decoded signals coming from the quantum trail humanity had left behind. "Then maybe," Varnak said, breath slow, "they didn't disappear." Corin nodded. "Maybe they just stepped forward. They didn't fail. They just disguised success as failure." Investigator Drovek stood beneath the Senate chamber's archival dome, his voice a rasping growl that cut clean through the hushed tension. The words hung in the air, brittle and dangerous. On the heads-up display beside him, a human power relay station blinked into view, recorded during what the Senate had once catalogued as Earth's final attempt at sustainable fusion. Grainy footage showed disjointed sparks, equipment flickering, technicians shouting to stabilize output. The kind of chaotic scene that comforted galactic observers. It confirmed what they already believed. "This was the footage your analysts flagged as technological immaturity," Drovek said, rotating the image to reveal unseen angles. "What you didn't ask was what was happening 20 meters underground." He tapped a rune on his wrist. A second overlay unfolded, a spectrothermal map of subterranean layers. The colors bled into a sharp, narrow bloom at the core of the facility. There, he zoomed in. Unregistered field activity, gravitational fold markers. None of it shows on the main feed because the sensors were spiked with electromagnetic masking. "Intentional interference?" asked Threxil from the side gallery, his voice tight. Drovek nodded once. "Carefully calibrated noise patterns, the kind used to confuse remote observers, not accidents. Camouflage." Representative Threxil stepped forward, folding his arms, his expression torn between skepticism and something approaching unease. Then what were they actually powering? Space-time modulation. The silence deepened. Even the adaptive chamber lighting paused its subtle pulse, as if waiting for breath to return. Drovek brought up a separate recording, infrared this time. It showed the same facility 30 seconds after the supposed failure. Above-ground readings dropped, but beneath the crust, a sliver of space-time distorted, bending inward before correcting. "That's gravitational manipulation," murmured Brevik from the physics delegation, "but not stabilized." "It wasn't meant to be," Drovek replied. "It was a rehearsal." Threxil shook his head. "You're telling me they built a gravity-bending engine and pretended it failed? In front of our inspectors?" "They didn't just pretend. They staged it, with decoy components, visible flaws, and exaggerated malfunctions. The entire presentation was theater." Corin's voice filtered through the side comms. "We have confirmation. Several diagnostic tools they allowed us to bring during inspections were pre-rigged with reverse calibration, fed us diluted readings from isolated dummy systems." Brevik's skin darkened slightly. They let us watch the puppet show while the real systems were hidden behind the curtain. Drovek turned back to the main council. The same masking signature appears in over 40 separate test facilities on Earth and Mars. In every case, what we documented as critical failure was, by all underlying metrics, a successfully suppressed prototype. He flicked his wrist. A map bloomed across the display. Dozens of incident dots lit up, each color-coded by incident type: energy failure, containment breach, field collapse. They planted an entire history of incompetence, and he stopped short of spitting the word, we accepted it, because it was easier to believe they were struggling than to admit we didn't understand what they were doing. A low mutter rippled from the far end of the chamber. A few council members shifted uncomfortably. One reached for a digestive stim, another tapped quietly on his console, not to respond, but to search. Threxel's jaw clicked. So every failed project, every misfire, every denied application, all of it was engineered to keep us looking in the wrong direction. Drovek nodded slowly. They never failed in front of us. They succeeded somewhere else entirely. Brevik leaned forward, his tone a shade too flat. What about their orbital station collapses, the relay breakdowns, the atmospheric leaks during their early Mars projects? Drovek adjusted the display again. I cross-referenced those failures with atmospheric signatures and heat gradients. The collapse reports? Fake. Most of those structures were never even manned during the malfunction events. The leaks? Fabricated data loops, looped footage, cloned system errors. In one case, the same alarm sounded in 2 different continents at the exact same time. Threxel's tone dropped, and none of us questioned it. Because, Drovek said, his voice sharpening, we wanted a slow species, a convenient one, harmless, manageable. But they gave us mirrors, and we mistook the reflections for truth. Stravik entered the chamber from the upper corridor, having listened silently through the feed. He stopped just short of the central platform, eyes scanning the gravity-stilled images flickering on the suspended display. "Continue," he said. Drovek obeyed. He accessed a secure folder recently decrypted from a corrupted observatory archive. Last year, Earth hosted a low-orbit test of an energy projection array, publicly described as an attempt at efficient planetary shielding against solar flares. Official output was 6% success. He rotated the view. But from the station's blind side, where no official instruments were aimed, we captured these. The image shifted. Distorted geometry bloomed across the ionosphere. Fields bent unnaturally. A narrow stream of energy danced across layers of space, then curled back on itself, an arc signature only theoretical until now. Stravik's gaze remained locked. That's partial recursive energy cycling. Brevik's breath caught. You can't cycle that kind of field without pre-collapsing the space-time matrix? Unless, Drovek said softly, you've already moved past stabilizing energy and started training it. The implications felt heavier than silence. This wasn't advancement. It was misdirection, woven into the foundation of their every step. They let us think they were climbing stairs, Drovek said, but they'd already built the tower. The room remained motionless. No panic, no outrage, just the awful, dawning weight of realization. Threxel, once the loudest skeptic, now looked older somehow. What else did they show us? That was never real. Corin's voice answered faintly through comms. Everything, because we never asked what wasn't there. Stravik turned toward the projection. Then we don't need to audit their failures. We need to find the moments they went quiet, the spaces they didn't invite us into. That's where the truth lives. Drovek powered down the last display, and for the first time in centuries the Senate didn't feel informed. It felt outplayed. The laser plasma display went dark. Drovek's final images faded into shadow, and in their place, unease lingered like residue. The council chamber didn't murmur this time. No whispered theories, no rebuttals. Just the realization they had been witnesses, not participants, in a stage-managed lie that spanned centuries. Scientist Brevik remained standing at the periphery, unmoved, arms locked behind his back. His eyes tracked the afterglow of Drovek's presentation like a strategist studying old battlefields, searching not for answers, but for cracks in assumptions. Stravik's voice broke the silence. "Brevik, you said you suspected something in their propulsion models." "I did," Brevik replied evenly. "I wasn't ready to name it." "Name it now." Brevik turned, gesturing toward the auxiliary panel on his interface pad. With a flick of his fingers, dozens of waveform archives cascaded into view, lines of telemetry data from Earth's experimental low-orbit tests, ionospheric drives, and deep space probes. They flickered across the suspended heads-up array, like shreds of forgotten language. "For decades," he began, "their drive technology presented as erratic, low-yield impulse at best, wasteful energy loops, poor field containment. Our analysts dismissed it as disorganized, sloppy." He adjusted the filters, the waveform density restructured. But these weren't flaws. They were carrier patterns. Embedded within the noise was a modulation signal, repeating, too subtle for standard resolution. The data surged, reconfigured into nested spirals. "Recursive encoding," Brevik said quietly. They hid structural blueprints inside distortion fields. Every drive test, every field burst, each one broadcast a fragment of something far more advanced. Threxel stepped forward, brow furrowed. "You're saying their test failures were concealed schematics?" "Yes, not all complete," Brevik confirmed. "But stitched together, cohesively, they form a partial design for a propulsion system built around artificial phase displacement." Corin's voice echoed in from the upper console ring. "That's theoretical. It was considered impossible." "Still is," Brevik muttered. "Unless you have energy control at a scale we've never achieved, or coordination across synchronized planetary nodes." Threxel blinked, his tone darkening. "They did have that. We thought they were just building crude planetary defense nets." Stravik stepped toward the central platform, his gaze locked on the layered spirals now looping on screen. "Show me how it works." Brevik nodded once. The model restructured into a three-dimensional simulation of a solar system. Tiny gravitational tethers extended between planetary masses. The simulation accelerated, fields expanded and overlapped, creating a harmonized loop that spiraled inward toward the sun. "Each planet acts as a phase vector," Brevik explained. "By timing gravitational pulses across orbital alignments, you can momentarily weaken local space-time fabric, just enough to slip it." "Slip it where?" Threxel asked. "Not where," Brevik corrected. "When. This isn't propulsion in a classical sense. It's evasion through phase rotation. They didn't move the solar system, they rotated it out of detectable sequence." Corin exhaled sharply. "So we weren't just looking in the wrong place. We were looking in the wrong frame." Stravik watched as the simulation ran its final loop, the solar system vanishing from view. No explosion, no ripple, just absence. "And this?" he asked. "You're certain this is what they did?" "I can't prove it," Brevik said, "but everything we dismissed as noise suddenly forms a coherent blueprint, one we were never meant to understand until it was already used." A counselor at the upper tier opened a communication line. "Then show us real evidence they meant for us to find this, not just a scattered pattern." Brevik hesitated. "There is something else." He tapped a secondary panel. "Earlier this cycle, during an unplanned scan of singularity, clusters across border space, a weak pulse was detected. Too faint for automated parsing. I've reanalyzed it." He projected the decoded waveform. It shimmered into a series of geometric arrays, identical to those discovered in the blueprint fragments. But here's the pattern, Brevik continued. This signal didn't come from one source. It came from 10, simultaneously. Stravik stepped closer. Locations? Brevik rotated the galaxy map, highlighting 10 separate singularity points, some near inhabited systems, others tucked deep into radiation pockets or gravitational knife zones where travel was suicidal. They're not random, he said. They form an arc, trailing toward the galactic core. A hush fell again. Each pulse is staggered slightly out of phase, Brevik added. Just enough to force whoever is listening to realign their decoding algorithms each time. It's not just a signal. It's a test. Threxel's voice lowered. They're measuring us again? No, Stravik said. They're giving us the chance to catch up. Varnick stepped into view near the archivist's terminal. I've started cross-referencing those singularity points with ancient migration routes and abandoned research outposts. And? Stravik asked. Varnack's expression grew grim. Some of those points align with locations mentioned in pre-senatorial myths, worlds abandoned after high-energy collapses or unexplained vanishing acts. Brevik adjusted the screen again. And if I'm reading this signal trail correctly, the direction leads straight toward something none of us dared touch. The galactic anomaly, Stravik said. More than that, Brevik whispered. The recursion field, the one we said was too unstable to observe directly. Threxel folded his arms. They disappeared and left behind a trail of breadcrumbs in places no one would dare go. Or could survive, Corin added. Brevik looked back at the others, finally speaking with clarity. They weren't running. They were forming a perimeter. Stravik closed his fists. And they want us to understand how they did it, if we're worthy. The chamber's lighting dimmed again, not from programming, but atmospheric tension. This was no longer about the past. It was about catching up. Stravik issued the order without delay. Activate all high-frequency tracking arrays. Monitor every band tied to human deep space activity, and reassign all physicists from the Interdimensional Research Group to singularity trail mapping. He looked around the chamber, his voice resonating like stone on glass. If this is the path they've laid, we follow it, not to find them, to see if we deserve to. Tyrex's claws hovered above the console, the room's dim overlays casting fractal reflections across his eyes. The chamber, deep below the Senate's core, was a sealed vault of quantum silence. No interstellar broadcast could penetrate it. No data could escape without intention. Only he and Glain had access. And right now, both stood on the edge of something that refused to fit inside any known schema of natural law. Glain's voice broke the still. We're through the 7th compression layer. The data structure on the laser plasma wall rippled like a liquid helix, each strand resolving into denser lattice codes. It wasn't just encrypted, it was adaptive. Every decryption refolded the structure, raising the complexity for the next pass. The signal was teaching them, or testing them. I've never seen a transmission evolve against decryption itself, Tyrex muttered. This isn't communication, it's filtration. Glain shifted closer, adjusting the harmonic balance on the signal integrity field. Then whoever designed this wanted to ensure only a specific mind could keep up. Tyrex grunted. Or they're leaving a trail for those ready to inherit it. The waveform finally collapsed into a single frame. A dense cluster of coordinates lit up, 10 singularity points, each pulsing faintly along the periphery of the galactic center. All previously flagged as navigation dead zones. Dead zones not for lack of interest, but for lack of survival. This is suicide, Glain whispered. Even our deep-field cruisers won't breach those thresholds. Gravitational collapse, radiation tides, particle storms. These coordinates are on the edge of collapse pockets. They're not trying to reach safety, Tyrex said. They're drawing a line. He brought up older singularity wave signatures. Their decay trails were too uniform to be natural, too focused to be coincidence. Then the realization hit like impact shock. They seeded these points, he whispered. Humanity placed nodes in places no species dared approach. Why? Glane asked. Why build a communication trail into the heart of annihilation? The chamber lights flickered, not from failure, but from activation. Tyrex turned sharply. A subroutine on the data block had initiated itself. On the heads-up wall, a face appeared. Human, aged, familiar, Ambassador Corin. He hadn't been seen since Earth's final diplomatic session, 3 cycles before their disappearance. But this wasn't a live feed. The data stamps were embedded in the oldest layer of the message, buried under quantum static that had only now cleared. "Galactic Council," Corin said calmly, his voice carrying a weariness too calculated to be mistaken for fear. "If you're seeing this, you've decrypted the entrance node." The room felt smaller. "We knew you wouldn't believe us," Corin continued. "That's not judgment. It's architecture. The Senate was built for consensus, and consensus fears the improbable." He paused, allowing the silence to weigh. "You saw our failures and missed the patterns. You watched our delays and missed the choreography. That was by design. We needed time, and your ignorance was our permission." Tyrex didn't move. Neither did Glane. The message continued. 300 years ago, one of our deep AI constructs, designed for quantum weather modeling, detected recursive entropy signatures from beyond mapped sectors. The pattern resembled accelerated mass decay not tied to stellar life cycles. It replicated, then consumed. Glane whispered, "Recursive collapse." "By the time we traced its path," Corin said, "we'd confirmed 12 vanished systems. No survivors, no wreckage, just blank gravitational coordinates with no emission."
A side panel activated, displaying each loss, not through footage, but through echo voids, galactic cartography erasures. We submitted warnings, proposals, research abstracts. Most were rejected. Some were ignored. A few were redacted. Corin's eyes hardened, so we stopped asking and started building. Tyrex looked to Glane. "He's not just explaining, he's laying out a war map. We knew phase displacement was possible," Corin went on, "but not survivable on the scale we needed, so we began decentralizing core research, embedding fragment tests into school projects, university failures, startup labs until the system learned to evolve itself through public obfuscation." Glane blinked. "They used civilian chaos as a testbed and kept the Senate watching the wrong hand," Tyrex added. "The screen showed layers of architectural plans, each tied to an Earth-based reactor site, each overlapping with gravitational sink models built from human-discovered recursive physics. The blueprints weren't ornamental. They were functional and real. Eventually, Corin said, "We created enough bandwidth to sync planetary cores, anchor displacement engines, and transfer the system ourselves to a converging array. We didn't disappear, we deployed." The coordinates returned, showing a line of humanity's current projected locations, each one flanking the inbound trajectory of the recursive anomaly. "We chose to intercept it," Corin said, softer now. "We chose to be the shield between extinction and ignorance. And if you're decoding this now, then the entity is closer than you thought." The screen flickered, then shifted again. New instructions displayed, recursive signal nodes that mapped theoretical response structures, each more advanced than anything the Senate had yet documented. The data wasn't just a warning, it was an invitation. Tyrex stood upright. "This isn't the end of a mystery. It's the opening volley of a war." Corin's final line appeared across the display, words encoded in quantum glyphs that pulsed once before dissolving. "We couldn't wait for you to believe." The screen went dark. Glane turned to Tyrex, jaw clenched. "We've only solved the how. We still don't understand the what." Tyrex nodded. "But we've been given our coordinates." Above them, the Senate's deep band alert chimed once. Every observatory that had previously flagged gravitational anomalies, Along the inner arc of the galactic core had gone silent. 10 points of darkness, 10 warnings unheeded, and now 10 signals answered. The final glyph from Corvin's transmission hadn't fully faded when the alert came through the core archive grid. Level 9 access override detected. Corvin's retinal code auto-registered the ping. He was already moving before the access completed its handshake. He hadn't touched those records in over a century, because no one was allowed to. Down in the vault, deep beneath the Senate's layered architecture, the temperature dropped, not physically, psychologically. The walls were lined not with data, but with warnings. None of them phrased as fear, only as logic. This is information that cost civilizations their existence. Varnak was already inside when Corin entered. He stood before the main projection cradle, watching as interlinked collapses spun in looping threads across galaxies, long since lost to time. These aren't projections, Varnak said without turning. They're post-mortems. Corin stepped closer. The heads-up display rotated a spiral of galactic arms, thinning in places like decay spreading across skin. Cross-reference Corvin's disappearance arc with these. Varnak tapped his interface. They match. Corin's eyes narrowed. The route humanity took follows the same collapse path logged in these records. They let the images speak for themselves, system after system. No remnants, not war, not silence, erasure. These records were compiled before the Senate even existed, Varnak murmured, from precursor civilizations. Some predate chemical propulsion. Corin's voice was hushed. How did humanity even find them? The archive flickered. A request log blinked onto the upper corner. Human access, timestamped 3.2 cycles before Earth's disappearance. They bypassed restrictions, Corin muttered. Used correlational queries instead of keywords. The system fed them access without ever tripping the audit flags. They didn't break in, Varnak said. They outthought the lock. He rotated the simulation forward. One image stood out, a recursive mass-consuming system. Cores not through force but repetition. Not a predator, but a feedback loop. A cascading collapse of physical law itself, eating entropy like food. We always assumed collapse was local, Corin said. It doesn't stop. It doesn't even move. It just repeats. It is the anomaly, Varnak whispered. The entity isn't a creature, it's a condition. Corin's spine stiffened. A self-correcting flaw in space-time logic. Corvin's voice returned, resuming where the message had left off. The recording had sensed the archive match and triggered autonomously. We found the pattern buried in our star weather AI, Corin said. A minor spike we thought was solar interference. Until it grew, the display updated, showing the old Earth records. AI logs flagging inconsistent photon returns from deep space. Only when compiled across decades did the anomaly resolve. We thought it was error, until the pattern mirrored recursive loop structures from collapsed theoretical universes. Varnak's head dropped slightly. They saw it coming and waited for us to listen. We never did. We knew we couldn't stop it, Corin continued. Not alone, but we could slow it, redirect it, or die trying where it mattered. A new projection took the screen. Earth's solar system relocated. Aligned not just with the entity's projected arrival path, but with recursive divergence points where collapse could be interfered with. They didn't run, Corin said. They positioned. They built a firewall using planets, Varnak added. Corvin's voice returned, lower now. We seeded observational signals not to be followed blindly, but to be earned. Decryption wasn't for navigation, it was a readiness test. If you got here, it meant you saw what we saw. The screen fractured into 10 smaller maps, each marking a position humanity had taken between vulnerable sectors and the recursive spread. Each node stabilized by gravitational counterfield stations Earth had once claimed were weather satellites. You saw our children solving impossible equations. Our elders building miracles from garbage. You thought we were random, but it was all part of training. They trained their population like a distributed neural net, Corin whispered. Public development for private calibration. Corvin's tone shifted. We chose to fight alone if we had to, but not because we thought we could win, because no one else was preparing. Brevik's voice cut through the shared channel from the physics tier. We've confirmed it, Corin keyed him in. Confirmed what? The recursive trajectory. It's accelerating. 5 of our outer outposts are no longer emitting. Destroyed, Varnak asked. Unmade. Their gravity echoes end mid-cycle, like they ceased to exist before finishing their own timeline. Corin's breath caught. Then it's already inside galactic space. Worse, Brevik added. It's adapting. Each collapse leaves less noise. It's learning to be quieter. Silence. Not metaphorical, literal. Stravik entered the archive room moments later, flanked by 2 Senate observers. His eyes scanned the display once, and he understood. This wasn't a war we ignored, he said. It was a funeral we refused to acknowledge. He walked closer, fingers tracing the outer rim of Earth's projected defense net. So they vanished from our space, not to hide, but to intercept. To buy time, Corin said. With themselves as the first wall. Stravik turned slowly, deliberately. Then we owe them more than a search party. He issued the command directly, notify all defense tiers. Every observatory, every propulsion lab, share the coordinates, share the data. Varnak hesitated. We don't have the technology. Then we borrow theirs, Stravik said. And if they refuse, Brevik asked through the open line. Stravik looked back to Corvin's final frame. We chose to fight, alone, if we had to. They already gave us the choice, he said. Now we decide what we do with it. The chamber dimmed again, not from fear this time, but focus. Humanity had built a wall, a network of planetary minds and time-bent physics to intercept the thing that erased galaxies. And now the rest of the galaxy had to ask itself a question it had spent centuries avoiding: will we join them, or follow them into silence? The signal reached them before the light did. From the outer edge of the galactic core, space buckled, not violently, but as if rearranged. Distances warped, coordinates shivered, observation outposts scrambled to compensate for positional drift across real-time telemetry feeds. Then came the rupture. Humanid explosion, a return. From a pocket once marked null in every Senate chart, Earth's solar system re-emerged. Not as it had once been, quiet, uneven, cluttered with unremarkable satellites, but reconstructed, unified and armed. Observer Tyrex froze at the plasma view wall. They didn't just phase back, they rewrote their position relative to the baryonic baseline. Glane stepped forward, stunned. That's not a solar system anymore. That's a machine. It began with Saturn. The planet's rings no longer orbited in disarray. Each segment pulsed in harmony, regulated by tethered anchor arrays, linking them to shield platforms spanning from Titan to Enceladus. The moons shimmered, not reflected light, but containment pulses bending radiation around the system like a shell of invisible armor. Jupiter, once turbulent with storms, was stabilized by polar field towers channeling energy along its equator in synchronized pulses. Energy cascaded along magnetic rails, stretching toward Mars, rails that linked into vast orbital spires laced with dark matter compression cores. Earth hovered at the center, radiant, not visibly, not artistically, functionally. It now emitted a pulse field so consistent, it disrupted nearby sensor calibration. Every scan had to downshift resolution, because Earth was now broadcasting reality stabilization metrics into open space. Brevik's voice filtered through the command nexus. That's anti-recursion emission. It's countering local entropy drift. Varnak stared. Earth is generating conditions to keep the anomaly from folding space. Above the system, 10 massive structures unfolded from phase. Angular, immense, each nearly half the size of Luna. Ships, though that term barely applied. Their hulls bent curvature maps, edge surfaces impossible to define, like constructs still deciding what shape they should hold. Brevik scanned their cores, gravimetric field generators, energy convergence nodes, something resembling sentient relay arrays, and one central anchor per ship. Stravik's voice cut across the line. Describe it. Brevik hesitated. Each core contains a seeded fragment of a planetary mind. Earth's cognitive infrastructure, split and distributed. Observer data chimed. One of the vessels turned, slowly, deliberately, toward the nearest Senate deep station. A transmission request followed. Live feed. The chamber fell still. The wall activated. No preamble, no encryption. Ambassador Corin appeared, older lines deeper, presence heavier. Time had worn him, but it hadn't dulled the eyes. They burned with exhaustion and resolve in equal measure. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. Behind him, the command deck of the largest human vessel pulsed with data flows beyond Senate comprehension. No chairs, no visible controls, just a layered interface of biological input lattices and flowing neural meshes, half organic, half architected. Then Corin spoke. "You watched us struggle, fail, collapse." He paused. "That's what we wanted you to see." He stepped aside. The background shifted to an image of the solar system, viewed from deep orbit. Energy lines stretched between planets like threads drawn taut, each one active, each one resonating with low-frequency stabilizers. "We'll let you believe we were unremarkable," Corin continued, "because if you'd known the truth too soon, your fear would have forced your hand. We needed time to build, to test, to learn what the universe was trying to kill us with." Threxel, watching from the central observatory, gripped the railing tighter. Corin turned back. "We built this while you wrote reports about our dysfunction." One of the ships phased closer into open view, aligning with the dimensional contours of the Anomalies' projected arrival path. Its sides shimmered with defensive fields so dense, gravitational curvature bent visibly around them. "This," Corin said, "is our shield." His voice deepened. "You dismissed our AI, our theories, our accidents. We let you, but we recorded every doubt, every refusal, every moment you chose bureaucracy over reality. And then we left, because the enemy wasn't going to wait." Glane whispered. "They designed their civilization like a recursive matrix." Corin's tone softened. "You've seen the data now. You know what's coming. The recursive entity doesn't destroy like a weapon. It erases like a flaw. It spreads through structure, repetition, assumption. It feeds on patterns." He raised one hand, so we stopped giving it any. Silence. Then he looked directly into the transmission lens. "If you still think we're the same species you met 200 cycles ago, don't follow us. If you're ready to join the fight, prepare, because what comes next isn't war." The signal ended. The chamber lights faded back into operational blue. Senator Voskor, long a vocal skeptic of human capability, stood from the council's rear gallery. His scales, once vibrant, had dulled under the weight of proof. He didn't speak to the room. He addressed Stravic directly. "Convene an emergency military assembly. We'll need every defense scientist, strategist, and systems engineer. We're not observers anymore." Stravic met his gaze. "You believe them now?" "No," Voskor said. "I understand them now. And I'll be damned if we sit in the back of history while they hold the front." Across every allied system, the signal duplicated itself. Outposts that had once scoffed at Earth's erratic reports now stood alert. Civilizations began recalibrating what progress looked like, and far beyond them, Earth's defensive fleet expanded formation, lining itself between the Anomalies' projected advance and the rest of the galaxy, not waiting, guarding. The anomaly had a shape now, not through conventional geometry, but through absence. Light bent before it arrived, signals fractured before translation. The core observatories, even shielded, could no longer parse its edge without recalibrating every known constant. From the outermost ring of the Senate's deep space monitoring grid, 3 systems had gone dark within a single standard hour. No debris, no radiation, just the echo of gravitational symmetry snapping into silence. Observer Glane, watching the feed from a quantum relay station near Fold Point 9, leaned forward, his claws tapping instinctively across the command display. Its inside-outer range. Estimated entity front has crossed the edge of map distortion fields. Brevik's voice came through, strained. "We have minutes, not cycles." In the center of the galaxy's aligned front, Earth's solar system rotated slowly, calmly, like a storm's eye waiting to decide whether to spin or swallow. The planets held perfect alignment. Energy spines arced between them, running like threads of consciousness. Inside this circle, Earth's core flared. It wasn't visual, it was effective. Gravity itself shifted across observation arrays. Instruments resynced not to capture energy, but to withstand it. On the primary Senate transmission node, the laser plasma display flared once more. Ambassador Corin returned. No preamble, No ceremonial address, just the tired eyes of a man whose people had been waiting for centuries for everyone else to catch up. "This is our final protocol," he said, quiet but unwavering. "We've set the barrier line.
You now know what we face.
What it feeds on, what it unravels." The screen changed, showing maps no one had ever seen. Human star logs layered with recursive modeling overlays. The trajectory of the entity curved across the galactic spiral like a scar, intersecting dormant system cores and folding mass until nothing recognizable remained. "We couldn't run," Corin continued, "not without bringing it with us. So we built this, a planetary-scale recursion sink, anchored in aligned mass and phase-displaced power." Brevik whispered. "They built an anti-collapse field using orbiting celestial mass." Corin nodded, as if hearing him. "This system is a lock, a gravity-threaded gate laced with decision trees. We fire when the recursive field reaches optimal density, and if we fail," he stopped, "let the moment breathe. If we fall, you must follow the map we've left behind. It isn't just coordinates, it's a timeline, a method, a truth you must teach yourselves." The signal paused for the first time, then restarted, this time showing Earth from orbit. The planet pulsed beneath layered defensive rings, its oceans converted into kinetic flow conduits, its landmass beneath atmospheric shielding channels that danced with oscillating frequency mirrors. Stravik, watching from the primary Senate deck, did not speak, nor did Vasker, nor Threxel. No one in the chamber moved, because now there was nothing left to debate. From the far side of the anomaly, an edge entered detectable range. It didn't look like a fleet. It looked like convergence, a repetition of galactic constants folding toward collapse, matter distorting under invisible weight, systems destabilizing simply from shared association. The recursive entity had arrived. Humanity responded. Saturn fired first, its anchor rings pulsing inward, then outward, unleashing directed gravitational compression that bent space ahead of the system. Jupiter's orbital stations followed, releasing pulses of negative inertia, designed not to destroy, but to delay entropy translation. And then Earth, not with a beam, not with a weapon, with a counter pattern. From deep inside the planet, frequency cascades erupted, not sound, not light, memory, encoded into stabilized mass and relayed through aligned moons. Earth began projecting a signal, a recursive sequence resistant to folding. Logic, physics, time, all layered into a structure that could not be copied or consumed. Varnik, watching from the archival tower, whispered in awe, "They aren't attacking the anomaly, they're teaching it failure." The entity reacted. Its outer edge surged, collapsing forward, attempting to override the signal with brute recursion, but the field held. The solar system bent under pressure but refused to yield. The aligned ships unleashed recursive counterbursts, amplifying Earth's pulse and repelling the entity's logic. It wasn't a battle, it was instruction by force. Corin turned to Stravik. They were never building weapons, they were building understanding, backward, from the collapse, and placing it, Stravik replied, right where it could not be ignored. Back at the edge of the council floor, Vasker stepped forward, his voice low but without hesitation. "I move for full deployment of Senate defensive resources. Let every allied world contribute field relay data. If Earth's pattern begins to degrade, we reinforce it." No debate, no delay, no objections came. Because now humanity wasn't an outlier. They were the front line. Brevik reported, "They've stabilized the anomaly's recursive crest. No collapse registered in the last 20 rotations." Tyrex added, "They've turned a planetary system into a firewall against extinction." Across the chamber, the heads-up walls lit one final time. Earth's ships hovered, silent in form, violent in purpose. Ambassador Corbin's face returned. "We'll hold the line as long as we can," he said. "If we fail, remember how we did this, not with arrogance, not with weapons, but with comprehension." He raised his hand, not in farewell but in continuity. And then the signal faded. For the first time in recorded history, the Senate chamber rose in collective motion, not to command, but to honor. Stravik stood last, watching the display dissolve into starless silence. He whispered, "Not for the record, not for the crowd, just for himself. They never left us, He looked down at the map Earth had left behind, glowing quietly on the floor. We left them,